Ian Lindsay of Lindsay and Associates has played an active role in the local community since 1979. He has been with RE/MAX, Vancouver Island's most advanced real estate business network, since 1996, marketing and selling residential, rural, strata, recreational, investment, and project development real estate. You'll find true real estate professionals at ianlindsay.ca.
Peter and Dave, they're on the mic, so right. Join the ride, it's gonna feel just right.
Welcome back to the Pulse Community Podcast. I'm Peter McCully. We're about a month into spring, and the mid-Vancouver Island region is watching the trees filling out with leaves. The patios are getting packed, and the community calendar is getting full.
And I'm Dave Graham. I haven't had time to be watching trees getting leafy. I've been cleaning out my garage.
Well, Dave, that's long overdue.
I've really only just begun, but I've made some progress. I've identified at least 4 distinct zones in there. Zone 1, things I know. Zone 2, things I don't know. 3 is things that could hurt me. And, well, then there's an entire corner that's all dark and cobwebby, and I've decided to leave it alone for now.
Well, it sounds like you've got it all mapped out.
I wouldn't get carried away. Mapped out sounds very ambitious. I call this a research phase, Peter. But I've already found some interesting things, such as a pocket fisherman.
What, you mean the K-Tel pocket fisherman they used to advertise on television? That's a classic.
Yes, what an invention. A fishing rod that folds up and fits in your pocket. Perfect for all those times when you're walking down the street and suddenly think, hey, I could really do with some fishing right now. Personally, I don't fish, haven't in years, but now I have a collector's item fishing rod just in case.
Well, it's funny how these things have a way of accumulating.
You have a strange sense of humor. But yeah, I found some other things. A lot of things that almost work are slightly broken, but I did come across some 8-track tapes. I'm just hoping one day maybe I'll find their player. I've also located a box that is labeled fondue set, which may or may not be true. It could take another day or two to get to that box. There's a chance it really could actually be my long-lost fondue set. Or maybe it's my long-lost set of vintage Hardy Boys books. Either way, it'll be a good day when I open up that box.
Have you had any time in all of this to maintain your crop of mint?
Mint crop. Oh, mint crop. Oh, no. I forgot about my mint. It's probably okay. Maybe getting a little crispy. I'm sure it'll be fine.
I'm sure it'll be fine too, Dave. On today's podcast, we have 2 fine guests. The first is Roy Forbes. He grew up in Dawson Creek, picked up a guitar at 14, and never looked back. He spent more than 5 decades writing, recording, and performing across the country, earning a place in the BC Entertainment Hall of Fame.
A big thrill for me was when the Trans-Canada Highwaymen, which is a new Canadian quote-unquote supergroup of 90s rockers like Craig Northey from The Odds, a fellow from Sloan, a fellow from The Pursuit of Happiness, and Stephen Page of the Barenaked Ladies. When I heard their version of Can't Catch Me, it just put a grin on my face because that's a different generation during my song, and that felt very cool to me. So I'm in. Go ahead out there, cover me.
When a younger generation is covering your songs, I think you've done something right. Rory was touring the island just a couple of months ago. He had such a good time. He's coming back for more. He'll be at Char's Landing in Port Alberni in May.
Also joining us is Cully Drake, a BC-based author, former newspaper reporter, and editor, whose debut novel was shortlisted for the Amazon First Novel Award. Erin has a new book coming out, When the World Was Twice as Big. We'll be talking about using AI in the writing process.
If you're using it to write the actual story, good luck. That's what I've got. Right now, maybe in 5 years. But right now, good luck. You get crap in, crap out. You're not going to make a good book. But if you use it to help you write the book, you're going to have a better book at the end than you would without it, which is part of that extinction event. AI is not going to replace writers, but I think eventually AI will replace writers who don't use AI.
As with so much about AI, that is both reassuring and disturbing. I tried to use AI to help me sort out how to approach my garage cleanout. It kept suggesting that I take a walk and think about it. As a master procrastinator myself, I really like that answer. I think that's not artificial intelligence, it's artificial brilliance.
Well, Dave will be joined soon by Chris Buck of the Chris Buck Band. Chris spent time in Nashville, then came back wanting to recreate some of that magic he experienced there. And so he organized the Boots and Boats Singer-Songwriter Festival in the Noose. This will be coming up on a future episode.
Ajay Freeze of Victoria joins us to talk about his new album and his role in a new show featuring Kevin Kline and Laura Linney.
Plus, look out, this is a good one. Tom Seawood, a Vancouver Islander now living in Washington State, will be joining us ahead of the upcoming Squatch Watch conference in the Comox Valley. Tom has more than a few things to say about seeing Bigfoot.
I have a few questions I'd like to ask a Bigfoot. Oh, wouldn't that make for a cool interview? Of course, we'd have to manage the language barrier, and I'd have to trust it to not just reach over and tear me in half. Maybe we should do it over Zoom.
I'm sure there's an app for that, Dave.
At Thrifty Foods, we love to help nonprofits, charities, and schools. Our Thrifty Foods Smile Card bulk program allows organizations to immediately save up to 6% on the purchase of Smile Cards in bulk, allowing you to keep more money in your organization's pockets. Ask for details at Thrifty Foods in Parksville.
There's exciting news for book lovers. Fireside Books in Parksville now has a second location in Port Alberni. The Bookworm. Used books are just $5 or less. The Bookworm on the corner of Redford and Anderson opens 7 days a week from 10 to 5. Building your personal library for less. Fireside Books at 464 Island Highway East in Parksville is a book dragon's dream come true. Browse their extensive collections 7 days a week. Both locations make growing your personal library easier than ever. New and used books and so much more. Order online at firesidebooks.ca and pick up at either location. Details available online. Ask about returning books for a book credit. Fireside Books and the Bookworm. 2 locations, one amazing adventure in browsing.
Stay tuned to the podcast, our website, and social pages for our upcoming giveaways. We have a summer of giveaways planned.
Right you are, Mr. McCully. Look out, everybody. There will be tickets for 5440 April Wine and Beach Fest Rocks. Head to our Facebook or Instagram pages or go to thepulsecommunity.ca for details on all the contests. All right, it's time to meet our first guest. Here's Marilyn.
Cully Drake is a British Columbia-based author, former newspaper reporter, and editor whose debut novel was shortlisted for the Amazon.ca First Novel Award and longlisted for the Leacock Medal for humor writing. His work explores the deeply human experience of living and connecting outside the margins of what society calls normal. He has a new book being released, When the World Was Twice as Big.
Thanks for making some time for us today, Aaron, for what I'm sure will be an interesting conversation regarding authors and the use of AI in creating a novel.
Well, Peter, I'm really glad to be here. I'm really interested to see where this goes.
Right off the top, Marilyn mentioned a book that you won awards for. Do you think this is strange as a novel you wrote directly from your experience as a father of a daughter who is on the spectrum? And in order to find a starting point for the conversation today about how AI could help an author create a book, perhaps you could briefly outline how long it took you to write the book and perhaps some of the steps along the way for those who may not be familiar with the process.
Okay, so it's a fluke. This one's a one-off because it took no time at all to write it. I think the whole thing from zero concept of what was going to happen to it being a first draft that was ready to be looked at by some serious people was 9 months. And the reason it was a fluke was at the time I'm working downtown and I would commute into Vancouver on the West Coast Express, which is a train, and you get an outlet and a table with a bench. And so I had my laptop and I had 90 minutes a day of no Wi-Fi. I had nothing but me and my laptop. And so I just started writing with no idea what I was going to write. I just started writing. At the time, I'm trying to understand my daughter and how she's thinking. So I kept trying to write as if I was writing from her point of view. And I just wrote whatever I thought of and I wouldn't look at it. I just write it. The next day, I'd start writing again from where I dropped off. And sometimes I continue what I written. Sometimes I do a new thread. And I wrote for weeks and weeks. Once I hit about 20,000 words, I said, okay, now it's time to look at it. And then I went back over what I wrote. And, I broke down into 2 categories: cringe. A lot of cringe, a lot of really just, oh, this is horrible. But then there's a lot of non-cringy parts where I started to see that there's a voice that's starting to come out, starting to emerge. And it's a voice that I like. And they're telling an actual story. And these little anecdotes are scattered across the 20,000 words. But when you pull them out and you put them together, you say, there's a thread here. There's something here. It's going somewhere. I don't know where it's going, but this is worth pursuing. Now I had my basis. And after that, I just kept writing and writing and writing and kept hoping for inspirations to come because I did not know what the climax would be. I did not know what the big reveal was going to be. It just kept eluding me. So I just kept writing. And then one day at about 80% through the book, it like, bam, hit me like an inspiration. Oh, that's what's happening. That's when the whole thing caught fire. And the twist was probably what really set it apart, that made it something that was sellable, that was made it something that was what the critics loved. That was just a complete fluke. The whole writing was a fluke.
It's interesting you say that you're writing the book and you were 80% of the way through when it all kind of came together for you. Do you suppose if an aspiring author used artificial intelligence to map out the entire plot, chapter by chapter, in advance, that structure would help?
It depends upon what type of writer you are. I'm one that wanders all over the place, and so that's why it takes so long to write anything. I didn't try it with my third novel. What I did with my third novel was I wrote down my idea of the plot. Here's what the plot line is going to be. And I wrote down the chapters. Here's what happens in this chapter, about a paragraph per chapter until I had it. And then I took that and I fed that into the AI. And I said, okay, here's what I've got going. Let's talk about this. Give me a critique. Don't blow smoke up my butt. Look it over. Tell me where the contradictions are. Tell me what's not interesting. And I engaged in a conversation with the AI. It would point out structural errors. It would point out flaws in reasoning. It would point out contradictions because that's what AI does. AI isn't artistic. AI is structural. And if you give it the right prompts, it will look for patterns in how you're writing. It will look for patterns in how you're sequencing the plot. And it will start to see things that you've put down through your subconscious. And you have no idea that you have put it down. The AI will point it out and says, by the way, this is what happens here. Perfect example is I was working on one chapter the other day. My process now is I write the chapter and then I'll ask the AI to critique it in the context of, here's the plot summary of the entire novel. Here's the summary of all the characters. Here's the summary of the theme. Keep these in mind. Look at this chapter and tell me where I'm going off base. And it'll critique it. It'll tell you, list the 3 things it likes. And that's nice because that gives you a shot of dopamine. You feel good about that. And then it starts to zero in. Here, you got this problem, you have this problem, you have this problem. And they're all structural problems. But it starts to make those connections between the things that your primitive mind has gotten you to write down. You don't even know why you wrote it. You just felt it was right. Your primitive, the subconscious, nonverbal part had you write it down. And it catches those things because it does not think primitively or consciously or subconsciously. It just looks for a pattern. And it looked at it and says, wait a second, you're missing something here. In this chapter, you have your main character starting to build out her second life, an alternative life. And I hadn't even realized I was doing that. But the minute it said it, was like, yes, this is exactly what's going on here. You caught that pattern. And now that will help me going forward. So in answer, yes, absolutely. Work with it. I would say flesh it out yourself first. Then the AI will go through it and it will catch the patterns that you've missed. And it's going to tap right into your primitive mind and saying, here's what the message is that you're trying to get across here.
So you think AI can help an author find their voice, or is there a risk of replacing it with something more generic?
My gut tells me, no, it can't. You got to have a voice. You got to find it yourself. Otherwise, you're going to start writing in the AI's voice, and that's a disaster. The truth is, AI is really good at composing a sentence for you. It'll give you a really good sentence. It'll give you a mediocre paragraph, and it will give you a horrible chapter. So you don't use it to find your voice.
Would it be fair to say new authors can think about there's a line there where AI can provide structure, but you can only provide lived experience?
I don't know about lived experience, because I think that you don't need to have a lived experience to actually write about an experience. You're pretty good at imagining. But more important, the AI is an editor. That's what it is. That you're the writer. Don't use it to write, because what you're doing is you're being lazy. You don't know how to write it. For whatever reason, you're afraid to write what you need to write. You're caught up because you can't kill your darlings. You've got a contradiction you just can't work through, and you're not writing. AI comes in and smashes all that with a hammer because it just keeps coming back and just reminds you, you have a contradiction. You have a contradiction. You have a contradiction. It forces you to write. And if you listen to it that way, you treat it like an editor and not as a co-author, you're going to sail if you start to trust the process. You're going to fly. My big knock is that I agonize over sentences, and I agonize over paragraphs, and I agonize over connections. And I'm so in love with my words, I'm afraid to delete them. But I started to trust the process and trust that AI, if it points out a spot that is wrong, my experience tells me 9 times out of 10, it's bang on. And if it says get rid of it, get rid of it.
Well, you mentioned editing and editors, and that's, of course, where many first drafts either come alive or fall apart. The AI-assisted editing, the grammar, the pacing, the consistency checks, how do you think that compares to human editorial feedback? Because this has shaped your first works.
I think you're asking the wrong question there. The question is AI going to replace editors? And we're going to go back to what I said earlier. AI is not going to replace editors. It's going to replace editors that don't use AI. The thing that excites me is the use of AI amongst editors gets to the point where there are editors out there that are really good editors. They're good because they've got great intuition. And they're using the AI to help them and assist them and to say, you're missing this. Anything the AI feeds back to them, they will then feed back to me. But it's a resonant loop. They look it over, the AI looks it over, they look at what the AI says and they go, yes. Now I also notice this, they feed it back in. And you get this iterative loop, this cycle where AI and the editor are working together. And within 15, 20 minutes, a half hour, suddenly you've got some serious edits, some serious recommendations that are bang on.
Research, of course, can consume tons of time for anyone writing anything, and for a brand new writer tackling perhaps an unfamiliar subject. How valuable is AI as a research companion, and what cautions would you attach to that? Because, as we know, AI can make things up.
I used it in my second book, which is coming out in a couple of weeks. I used it to do research on various areas. I need information on Hurricane Utah was a good example. If I'd done that on Google, I would have ended up being on Wikipedia, and I would have gotten information on Hurricane Utah. Then I'd have to go somewhere else and extract out the stuff that I'm looking for. But AI, because you can prompt it, because you can set a context, it knew I was looking for Hurricane Utah. It knew there was Hurricane Utah in my book. It knew the reason why Hurricane Utah was in my book. It came back and it said, now, in the referring to your book, this is why it's interesting. So it finds you the things that apply a lot better than you're going to find searching for yourself. You may find more searching for yourself, but it's going to take you an hour instead of 15 minutes to get the same result. The caution is, of course, that you can't rely on it. I'm a former editor. So the mantra is 2 sources, buddy, 2 sources. Double check. Just find somewhere else that is confirmed and you're good to go. I use this all the time at work because one of my roles at work is I have to keep tabs on privacy legislation, GDPR and PIPEDA and all that stuff. So I'll get it from ChatGPT. I'll get the relevant section. And it says, I got to verify this. And I'll go straight to the actual source to look at that paragraph. Yeah, they're right.
I always ask AI for a hard link to whatever the reference happens to be, just so I can pop it open and check it.
Yeah, I always forget to do that.
Aaron, as someone who wrestled with your own books, what would you say to a brand new author who wants to, as they think, shortcut the hard parts? What are the hard parts?
There's hard parts and there's painful parts. And there's a big difference between the two. The hard part is getting up every day and just writing and trusting the process. And there's no AI that's going to fix that. If you can't write it, AI is not going to write it for you. It is, but it's going to be junk. Don't even go there. Now, the painful part is if you're struggling with editing a chapter, it's probably because you can't let go of something in that chapter. You're hooked on an anecdote, maybe a scene, a sentence even. You just can't let it go because something inside you hates the idea of killing your darlings or You don't want to perturb the logical structure you've got in your head, and you just can't do it. So you spend hours going over that same chapter, tweaking, because you're too afraid. If your AI is properly configured, properly prompted, it knows where true north is because you've told it the plot, you've told it the theme, you've told it the characters, you've told it what's important, and it never forgets that. And it will never stop telling you where you're wrong. You feed the chapter in, it tells you what to fix, you make an adjustment, feed it back in, it tells you to fix the same thing, you make another adjustment, feed it back in, it tells you to fix the same thing. It will never lie to you. It will always tell you where the problem is and it needs to be fixed. And it does it in a good way. It's an AI is your mom, except for without the guilt. It just constantly wants your success, and it will constantly remind you of what you need to do. The painful part is getting over that block of, I can't kill my darling. But if you have someone or something you trust telling you again and again, you got to kill it, you're going to get past that part. And the painful parts are going to go away.
Now, your new book that you mentioned, When the World Was Twice as Big, tell us what's that about and what you used AI to help you with in the writing of that book.
That one is what happens to the main character in the first novel. After everything goes down, everything goes south, and everything gets resolved, this is the next few years of his life as he tries to pick up the pieces and move on with his life and reconcile himself with an abusive father and deal with memories of his mother. It's a hero's journey. He ends up out in the wilderness planting trees for years before he can even get the strength to come back to town and figure things out. That's mainly what it's about. I finished writing it well over a year ago, the first draft. So that was before AI really was starting to take hold. So by the time it found an editor, by the time it found a place, I hadn't touched it with AI. I'd used the AI for telling about Hurricane Utah because I need some background on that. I think it was fortuitous because it had me focus not on what I should write or how to write it, but it had me focus on how do I fix this scene? How do I fix this discontinuity? How do I fix the contradictions? So I started to talk to it about things like, I've got two scenes here. They're contradicting each other. I can't figure it out. Let's talk about it. It would point out the areas where there's a contradiction. And that was the best part. You feed them in, you don't tell them what the problem is. And then AI comes back and says, your problem is right here. And you knew it. And you said, let's see if they find it. And 9 times out of 10, it finds the contradiction that you already know is there. So it was an accelerant. It helped me have the courage to move forward and say, I'm right on this one. Okay, this is a contradiction. This does need to be fixed. I'm not just vacillating or I'm not just being nervous. This actually needs to be fixed. I would say it at least doubled my productivity for sure.
Now, when you write your next book, Aaron, will there be parts of the process that you will not use AI for?
I can't foresee any reason I would use AI for the actual writing. If I'm starting from scratch, because I'm using it right now on my third book, and I'm using it intensely on every single chapter. But once again, the chapters have already been written, and now I'm trying to fix everything, which is what takes the longest time. But if I'm starting from scratch, I will absolutely use it to help me figure out ideas about how to get from point A to point B in terms of what's logical, how do we get there? I came back from a vacation in Greece with this wonderful title in my head, but no plot. And the title was, I think this vacation could have been an email. And I said, oh, that's gold. That's a great title. Someone's going to pick that up for sure in an airport. All I got to do is write something with it. So I went to ChatGPT and it says, here's my title. I just came back from Greece. Let's talk about it. And it started to just rattle off possibilities. Then it would say, would you like me to make a plot for you? I said, yes. It just went off on a tangent. It was a disaster because in the end, I don't like anything you're saying there.
There were no guardrails.
There's no guardrails. It just comes back with crap. But if you work with it and you consistently say, here's the North Star, let's make sure we work towards that, it will circle around your own thoughts. It will iterate anything you say and bring it back to you. It will have its own ideas, but these ideas tend to be structural, tend to be thematic, tend to be really down there at the primitive level, and that does not focus on the actual minutiae of scene to scene, just the theme, and it keeps you on track. So I'm going to use it for that for sure. Going to write everything myself, But you can bet that once I write it, I'm going to say, have a look at this and tell me if we're on track.
In preparation for our chat today, I did a little looking around on the internet and found some prompts for authors writing books. And one of the prompts that kind of was eye-raising for me was a very short prompt, and it was, take a look at my book and take a look at the story arc, examine the characters, and see where we're in trouble with the story plot, because perhaps something has been left hanging open. I thought that was really interesting.
Oh, it's brilliant. I'm going to pull up mine here. This is the one that I'm working on right now. This is a dark humor novel, first person. Always consider the plot in my plot summary document that I've uploaded. Consider the characters document. Stay in alignment with the elevator pitch. When asked to critique, consider the entirety of the chapter in the context of the plot summary and the characters. Act as if you were a mid-20s urban employed female, because that's the target market. If you consider it fairly close to these documents, do not worry about looking for problems. Only highlight significant problems. Always offer tweaks. List the good first, then spend more time detailing the problems. Review the structure, identify holes if significant. Finally, pick out writing that has no point. Identify scenes that don't move the story forward.
Interesting. A final question for you today, Aaron. As we all know, there's an ongoing debate about whether AI-assisted books are truly authored, quote unquote, by the person whose name is on the cover. Where do you stand on the ethics and the authenticity of AI-assisted writing?
If you're using a spell checker, is it still writing? Yes. If you're using a grammar checker, is it still writing? Yes. If you're using computer-aided drafting, is it still yours? And these are all yes, because the heart of it, the actual beating part of the story, that's what you're trying to bring out, is AI helping you show that beating heart. If you're using it to write the actual story, good luck. That's what I've got. Right now, maybe in 5 years. But right now, good luck. You get crap in, crap out. You're not going to make a good book. But if you use it to help you write the book, you're going to have a better book at the end than you would without it, which is part of that extinction event. AI is not going to replace writers, but I think eventually AI will replace writers who don't use AI.
Cully Drake, what a fascinating mind. And what a worthy conversation to have for writers and readers and folks who are just simply trying to figure out what to do about AI. You'll find links to Aaron's work in our story notes at thepulsecommunity.ca.
Also on our website, we keep a growing library of stories for kids. Our Skookum Kid stories include the adventures of Captain Dave on the Mellow Submarine, and in the latest story about Peter and Gracie, the Eskimo dog, Peter and Gracie start their own neighborhood heritage festival.
Tune in to find out how it turned out and download the coloring page so you have something extra to play with while you listen. Well, we call them kid stories, but I wouldn't want to be ageist about this. Everyone's welcome to enjoy them.
Our radio archaeology series brings you classic, original radio episodes of Dragnet with Sergeant Joe Friday and Gunsmoke with Marshal Matt Dillon.
We also invite you to join Cindy Thompson of Parksville with her podcast, A Resilience Project. It features stories that illustrate people moving from surviving to thriving.
Our partners in podcasting include Nonpartisan Hacks with Parksville counselors Sean Wood and Joel Grenz, offering a fascinating look at how the sausage is made in municipal politics.
You'll find all this and more at thepulsecommunity.ca, and we encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. That means being among the first to know about upcoming guests and contests.
When families are supported, our whole community thrives. That's why SOS launched For Our Families, a campaign dedicated to keeping essential and enriching SOS child, youth, and family programs open, accessible, and vibrant. You can make a donation through the SOS website, and you can help by teeing off at the first ever SOS For Our Community Golf Tournament, June 6th at Morning Star Golf Club. For just $180 per person, enjoy the driving range, 18 holes of golf, a golf cart, buffet dinner, on-course challenges, the chance to win a brand new vehicle from Parksville Chrysler, and other great prizes. Bid on great local items in the silent auction. Support local children and youth. Strengthen local families. Learn more at sosd69.com.
Ian Lindsay of Lindsay and Associates has played an active role in the local community since 1979. He has been with RE/MAX, Vancouver Island's most advanced real estate business network, since 1996. marketing and selling residential, rural, strata, recreational, investment, and project development real estate. You'll find true real estate professionals at ianlindsay.ca.
Dave, I wanted to come back to your garage cleanout for a moment. It seems you've begun to work through a time capsule of your own making. You might even find a treasure of some kind there.
Oh, I'm already there, Peter. I found a rotary phone. And you know what? When the classic technology makes a comeback, I will be the coolest kid on the block. Just like I'm going to be once I lose enough weight to get into my bell-bottom jeans from the 1970s. And you know, if I can find my platform shoes, I'll be ready for the disco. Our next guest can trace his career back to the 1970s. What a ride it has been and continues to be. Here's Marilyn.
Roy Forbes grew up in Dawson Creek, BC, picked up a guitar at 14, and never looked back. Known in his early years as Bim, he spent more than 5 decades writing, recording, and performing across Canada, earning a place in the BC Entertainment Hall of Fame and a UBC honorary doctorate. He has been the host of Roy's Record Room on CKUA for more than 20 years.
Roy, thanks for joining us on the Pulse Community Podcast.
Happy to be here, Peter.
You grew up in Dawson Creek, up in the Peace Country, northeastern BC. It's a long way from the singer-songwriter scenes that were happening in those days in Vancouver. What was that world like for a young musician who was dreaming big?
Oh, it was challenging. The word dreaming is a key word because, in the 60s, I started to play in 67. Quite a few years ago now, I had to live through magazines, and every now and again, something relevant would show up on TV. Like seeing Eric Clapton with his Gibson SG that had been painted in a psychedelic manner, and looking at how he held his pick and how he had his fingers loose, not clenched up the way I was doing, little things like that, but had to figure it out on your own. No internet to look up the chords, nothing. There were mentors, George Hauser was a older guitar player than me, and he was really a good mentor. I mean, we all would jam with each other, all of us like-minded musicians. We just had to figure out how to do it. My friend Terry and I figured out between us, and then me on my own, figured out how to write songs. We did a rock opera in 1970 for the Grand Prairie Battle of the Bands, which we won, by the way, Peter. I put in the 10,000 hours or whatever Malcolm Gladwell says. And by the time I got to Vancouver, I was 18. I was ready.
When did you know that music was going to be your life?
From a very young age. Always been obsessed with records from before I could read. Apparently, some adults would come in and they'd pick up a record. They'd say, "Who's this?" I'd say, "That's Hank Snow on RCA Victor." I don't know how I knew all that stuff, but totally obsessed with music. Began writing songs. I think my first attempt was in grade 2. Then when the Beatles came in 64, the big deal was they wrote their own songs. I thought, well, I could try that. And I always paid attention. You look at a single and you got the title in bold type, and then there's the brackets underneath that say Lieber Stoller, and then underneath it would be Elvis Presley. I became aware that people had to write these songs. That's what got me going.
Now, do you remember the lyrics to that very first song that you wrote?
One in grade 2, no. I think it was called They Were Just in Grade 2. It was a song about a failed love affair of 2 kids in grade 2. That's all I remember.
Well, I think you did pretty well to remember that.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, you mentioned Hank Snow. I read somewhere that your first concert memory was seeing Hank Snow perform, and you talked about feeling like Hank and you were the only 2 people in the room. How old were you at that point?
I would think 61, 62, so I would have been 8 or 9. In my mind, from when I was 2 or 3, I knew that I understood music. Somehow I knew it, even though I couldn't articulate it. And I knew that I was destined to do what I'm still doing today, all these years later. And seeing Hank, I am a kid full of dreams. I've always been a kid full of dreams, even now. And when I saw Hank at the Vogue Theatre, which, by the way, later became the Elks Hall, where my band would play, I just thought, if Hank could know me, he'd know. He'd see it in my mind. I fantasized that if I had a guitar pick, which I'd never even touched at that point, and he lost his, I could give him mine. Little kid dreams. He was a hero around the house. We had his records, and he was big on the radio. So, yeah, I did a lot of high-powered dreaming. Seeing Neil Young in 71 when I was, 17, that was a whole different thing because by then I was writing, and I loved his After the Gold Rush album. Seeing him, it was a tour he did where he had a back brace, and he sat, and he told funny stories. He played all these songs. He played one he'd written the night before. It was like I had been given permission to do what I was going to do anyway. So that was a mind blower as well.
Now, you mentioned that was 1971. You were under the name of BIM in those days and landing opening slots for acts like Supertramp and Santana. Can I read you something that I found on the internet about that Santana show?
Please do.
This is how it goes. I saw Bim, as he was called back then, walk out alone on stage to a wild crowd as the opening act for Santana at the Edmonton Fieldhouse in the early 70s. He played I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry to end his set, earning the crowd's collective attention. His last note was answered by the respect of 2,000 collective souls, sharing a moment of exquisite silence, followed by the cheers of all the new Bim fans. Santana was great, but this is what I remember 40 years later.
Wow, I wasn't aware of that. Brings it all back. I joked that I did my half-hour set in 23 minutes.
What was that sudden leap like from Dawson Creek to those big stages, and how did a young kid kind of hold his own in front of those crowds?
Well, when I first got to Vancouver, I played a few coffee house gigs, Gastown Saloon. I played at People's Park. I did have a manager because a band called Spring had come through town in the winter of 71. They had a record called A Country Boy Named Willie, a 45, and they were touring it. They had a station wagon and a U-Haul full of equipment. So I opened for them, and I had just the week before written about 10 new songs. I was pretty prolific in those days. They loved me. It was so cool. The great musicians. I found out later some of Vancouver's top session players at that time. And their manager was with them, Roger Schiffer. And he gave me his phone number, and he said, when you come down, phone me. I had that in right away when I got to Vancouver. That fall, Roger got me an opening spot for Rita Coolidge at the Queen Elizabeth Theatre. By that time, I'd written, 50 other new songs. 10 of those. I went out there and they loved it. They loved me. I got screaming reviews in local papers. I thought, okay, I've arrived. Of course, that wasn't quite how the way it worked. I ended up leaving Roger a year and a half later and hitting the coffee house circuit and really learning how to perform. So by the time I got to Santana, which was probably 76, I'd had a fair bit of coffee house style performing under my belt. But Peter, the people I worked with would put me on these shows, and I just go out and just do my best. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't.
That's life.
Yeah.
Your first commercial success was the single Can't Catch Me.
Yeah.
You performed that under the name Bim. And then I realized I don't know where the name Bim came from.
The nickname I had when I was a kid. We used to joke of big in music.
Then in the 80s, you went to your given name, Roy Forbes.
I just felt more like Roy Forbes, and perhaps foolishly made the shift in 1987. I still have people coming up to me and say, hey, wait a minute. You're Bim. I go, yeah. Elvis Costello tried it. John Cougar Mellencamp tried it. And I did it. I paid a bit of a price, but, the people who figured it out, they're back and they're supportive as they ever were.
Now, you mentioned you had written about 50 new songs by the time you got to meet Rita Coolidge, who at that time I think was married to Chris Christopherson.
They were courting. Rita barely had time to talk to me because she was too busy spooning with Chris. So I didn't really meet either of them. But the exposure I got from those shows, one in Vancouver, one in Edmonton, was amazing. It was very helpful to me when I could pull those reviews out and say, this is what I do.
When you're writing all those songs, how do you know when a song is really finished? And how do you know when you've got enough of them to make a record?
What a question. I don't know if songs are ever really finished. When I get to the point where I can live with them, they don't give me a poke every time I sing them, then I feel like they're ready for the stage. And then if they go okay on the stage in concert, I'm often tempted to say to the audience, okay, this is a brand new one, which of course means, so you really have to like it. I really try not to do that until after I've sung the song and gotten a decent reaction. And if I don't get a decent reaction, I might not mention it at all. But songs are in a constant state of evolution, even if it's just changing one word. If I Were a Raven from Crazy Old Moon has an opening line. The original is, one line is, nothing seems to be right. The note feels like it needs 2 syllables. So about 3 years after recording and releasing it, I started to sing, nothing appears to be right. It sings better. It heightens the meaning of that opening lyric.
Well, songs are very personal, obviously, and they've been recorded by artists like Shawn Colvin, Sylvia Tyson, Susan Jacks, Garnet Rogers. Well, we'll have to talk about the 6 degrees of Roy Forbes here because I've met 2 of those people.
Oh, there you go.
What does it feel like to hear somebody else inhabit a song that you write? And has it ever changed how you hear one of your own compositions?
My friend Betty Chaba was the first person I heard sing one of my songs. It was right after my heart. I almost felt invaded, like, what is this person doing with my song? Now I feel totally different when I hear Sylvia Tyson sing right after my heart. At the time, she was keeping up with the times. That would be 79, I think. She had synthesizers on there, which, of course, I was not a fan of. But I've listened to it a bit recently because we put up a page on my website, Roy Gets Covered, where we've got a lot of those people singing my tunes. One day, I'm practicing it for a show. I thought, wait a minute, I'm phrasing it like Sylvia did. The influence goes back and forth. And, you mentioned Can't Catch Me. And a big thrill for me was when the Trans-Canada Highwaymen, which is a new Canadian quote-unquote supergroup of 90s rockers like Craig Northey from The Odds, a fellow from Sloan, a fellow from The Pursuit of Happiness, and Stephen Page of the Barenaked Ladies. When I heard their version of Can't Catch Me, it just put a grin on my face because that's a different generation doing my song. And that felt very cool to me. So I'm in. Go ahead out there. Cover me.
You were very famously a part of UHF, Sherry Ulrich, Bill Henderson, Roy Forbes. Such a great combination of voices. And you produced a couple of albums. Will there ever be a third?
I don't think so. I think we're all off doing other stuff now. But very fond memories and some very exciting musical moments with Sherry and Bill. You get that 3-part harmony going. Bill and I really meshed as guitar players. I treasure that. When I hear myself playing a solo, sometimes I hear a bit of Bill's vibrato, and I think he got a bit of my vibrato as well when he's rocking out with Chilliwack. It was fun. I love those albums, and I love all the shows we've done. I don't know. Never say never, though, right, Peter?
That's right.
Yeah.
Never retire.
No. Can't do that.
For folks who haven't heard of it, Roy's Record Room is on CKUA, which they can listen to online, of course. You've been on for 20 years. You spin 78s, 45s, LPs, very eclectic stuff. It's from your own collection. My question is, when did you start collecting records, and how many do you have in that collection now?
Well, okay, I've always had records in my life, as a consumer, as a kid, buying the Beatle records and Who and Jimi Hendrix and all of that. We had 78s in the house when I was little, and I was always intrigued by those. And then, of course, it became the album years where you never buy a 45, you buy the album, on into CDs. But I guess I would always pick up records when I was on the road and had time to go into a junk store or a record store. I really hit it hard, the collecting, in the early 90s. Instead of buying a reissue album of Clyde McPhatter, I decided I want the original record because they haven't messed with the original sound. So I want that original record. Early 90s, I started with 45s, 78s, and albums from their era of release. And with the 78, if you get a Louis Armstrong from 1926, it's pressed from the original stamper that they made in the studio. So that's about as close as you're going to get to Louis live, rather than something off a reissue album that was, had added reverb and compression and all the stuff they do for CDs or vinyl. Buying individuals turned into buying collections and picking through them and, getting rid of the stuff I didn't need. So now I'm spending a lot of time, and I have help, people reading me labels, going through what I have and playing them on the show. I haven't really bought a lot of new or fresh stuff in a while, although I do have a pal named Al who phones me up every now and again, and he'll read me a bunch of records, and I can't resist. Okay, I'll take that one. As far as how many I have, too many.
Never have too many. Unless you're moving from Nova Scotia to British Columbia and they charge you $1 a pound, you can never have too many.
My grandson Riley lives in Port Alberni, and we always joke about moving over there. At one point, I said to somebody, first of all, we have to book the barge for the 78s.
Talking about records, your last album, Edge of Blue, you described it as feeling like your first album to you, even though it was your 14th. Did losing your sight change the way that you write and hear music?
Maybe not so much hearing. There's all the talk about you lose one sense and the others get more attuned. I wish that were the case with my hearing, which is terrible. I've always written in my head. I'm always turning over musical ideas or lyrics in my head. I've done that since before I became a writer. I really have to be on it now because I can't just grab a piece of paper and scribble something down and throw it in my pocket. So I've got a little recorder that travels with me in my left-hand pocket and my phone, if there's an idea I need to get down. Of course, I use the computer a lot more than I used to when I'm finishing up the lyrics. My mind is my demo studio. I hate to waste energy on doing a demo. Usually I'm a first, second take kind of guy. So you end up going into the studio trying to recreate something that's already there, but perhaps doesn't have studio quality sound. Edge of Blue, which I had gone through a dry spell writing-wise. When I lost my sight, I had about a 6-month period of just getting used to the idea that it wasn't coming back. I had my old Stella, $7 Stella with 10-year-old strings, leaning on the couch. I didn't have my good guitars out because I didn't want to wreck anything. But the old Stella can take a lot of abuse. So I wrote most of the record on that Stella, using my old cassette recorder to get ideas. When I finally had enough material for the record, it felt triumphant that the writing had come back and that I'd gotten a few songs that I actually really like.
So speaking of the album Edge of Blue, tell us about the song from the album More Than a Little Bit Blue, Roy.
That was a gift, as they all are, all the good ones. It was strumming on the old Stella, as I mentioned, and this melody started to pop up. The way the good ones come, they're usually unintentional. You know, you'll get a melody, the melodies start to form words. So the melody formed, I'm Here, You're Gone. And then I think the title came fairly quickly. Then I get to the bridge, wonder why? I thought, okay, I'm really liking it because I was moving in a soul direction. I worked away at it. I didn't have all the lyrics, didn't know what it was about until I'd had it a couple of days. And I thought, wait a minute, this is about my sister Lil, who had died in 2015 and was one of my big musical inspirations. And then I knew it was about her because I'd found that much of the song. It took another week or two before all the lyrics finally fit into place. I structured it so that I would have some time at the end to do a little bit of testifying. You know, James Brown, Sam Cooke, Little Willie John, Clyde McBatter. You know, those guys testify at the end of their tunes, and I wanted to be able to do that. So I left a little spot at the end where I could, yeah, you know, really get into it. It was magical coming up with that one. I'm here, you're gone, cold black night crawls to the dawn, and I am more than a little bit blue. They said it was bound to be, but that brings no comfort to me, and I am more than a little bit blue. I wonder why we had to say goodbye. Makes me so lonesome. I could cry. Oh, you flew away. You're gone. Yes, I learned how to carry on. Right now I'm more than a little bit blue. I am more than a little bit blue. I am more than a little bit blue. I wonder why we had to say goodbye. Makes me so lonesome. I could cry. Oh, you flew away. You're gone. Yes, I learned how to carry on. Right now I'm more than a little bit blue. Ooh, right now I'm more than a little bit blue. I am more than a little bit blue. Joe bit blue.
Roy, you're still performing, still hosting the radio show after more than 5 decades. What would you like folks to take away when they leave one of your shows or listen to one of your shows?
I hope people can come in, maybe laugh and cry, laugh some more, maybe cry a little, laugh. Forget their lives for a couple of hours, just become a part of what's happening. It really is a give and take. Any live show, you've got the performer and you've got the audience, and they're giving it back and forth, and it becomes one big organism. If I'm giving it to the audience in a good way, they'll most likely give it back to me in a good way, and they're cheering whatever their response is. They're out of whatever's going on in their lives for a couple of hours. They're taking a break with Roy.
Roy Forbes, 50-plus years in, and still making music that matters and stories that stick. You'll find Roy's tour dates and music in our story notes at thepulsecommunity.ca. Roy's coming back to the Mid-Island with a show in Port Alberni in the coming months. Now I want to go through my vinyl records. I'm sure I have a BIM album in there somewhere. I think it's time to give it another listen.
We'd like to hear from you if you have a story to share or anything to add to the conversation. Find the contact link on our homepage and leave us a voice or text message.
You'll find links to all our podcasts, plus events, contests, and Vancouver Island webcam links at thepulsecommunity.ca. Otherwise, you can find us on Apple, Amazon, iHeart, Spotify, TikTok, and YouTube, and we're also on Facebook and Instagram.
Dave, we've had some frosty mornings as recently as last week, but the forecast says that's probably behind us now, and it's just going to keep getting nicer out there. We have an exciting summer coming.
Oh, I can't think as far ahead as summer. My world is 3 square feet of floor space that I have cleared in my garage.
And what about that dark corner that you don't want to think about?
Exactly. Not going to think about it. Oh, it's spider territory now. Probably big ones, too. I'm sure there are wolf spiders back in there. Do you know how big they can get? And tarantulas oh, no. Do we have tarantulas on the island? You see, you got me thinking about it. I need a happy thought.
How about some lollipops and rainbows, Dave?
They're frightening. It's scary, my love of sugar.
Take some deep breaths, Dave. 4 in, 4 out. Tomorrow's another day.
That reminds me that I have a Blue Jays game that I need to watch tomorrow. Got to. Did I tell you I've become convinced that the Jays cannot win if I'm not watching? It's a big responsibility, but I think I'm coping pretty well. Anyway, what was that you were saying about deep breaths? Deep breaths of what exactly?
Here come Peter, here comes Dave. Oh, listen. Bringing stories, making waves. No missing. Spinning tales in the podcast cave. So listening. Laughs and insights everywhere. What a treat. Peter and Dave, they're on the mic, so